Progress.
Thank you. We kind of weigh in
We're recording you.
on are we monitoring our spend that supports small, medium enterprises? What are we doing to support micro exempt enterprises? Are we supporting Black-owned businesses enough? And where we find ourselves lacking, we make sure that we are heading towards and achieving the transformation goals that we have set. We are doing that as a growing local manufacturer that employs just below 500 employees.
Yeah.
Why can they not be held to the same high standards?
Yeah.
Why can we not ask the private sector to come to a table and come to the party and support us in these initiatives? And this is primarily why, I think from a Acacia perspective, we became part of the Proudly South African stable, because it was the buy local campaign that resonated with us. You know, we realized that actually it's something that we can't do on our own, right? There's only so much noise that we can make. There's only so much coleslaw you can bring to this braai. But you need everybody else to bring something to the table.
Yeah.
We decided that we needed to affiliate ourselves with people who are making the noise that is going to support our narrative. And that was the Proudly South African brand and a buy local campaign. And look, I applaud the work at Proudly South African because wherever we find ourselves at a loss, and I'll share an example. I think during the pandemic, I think Martin spoke about the PPE tender spaces.
Yeah.
We were actually one of the companies as well that responded to one of these tenders, you know, and we found ourselves at a loss, for instance, when the business was still going or being awarded to Chinese companies, when right here within our borders, we were there. We could do it. We had raised our hand. We were competitive in pricing. And we sat back and we asked ourselves, but what is it then? The frameworks were there from a public perspective. The policies favor us. The local content is there. What is the issue? But it's been Proudly SA, for instance, who's been pushing and escalating these matters, because these are the tables that we don't sit at. And we thank you guys for your work in that respect. But then we ask the private sector as well,
Yeah.
why can they not be forced?
Absolutely. And there we go. And this is where my frustration comes into this, because, you know, why? When legitimately you can do this, and yet we still go and we give our money elsewhere. Now, Stavros, you sit at these tables too. I mean, you sit at the highest tables in the land. And, you know, if we can't talk about legislation for such an important issue, where, again, I go back to the very first words we heard in the opening here by Vern, saying we need to do things differently. That was then, this is now. Things have changed. Our economy is in tatters. We need to rebuild this, and we can only do this by supporting ourselves. What can we do? If it can't be legislated, surely then we can offer incentives for the private sector to ensure that X amount is procured locally, but really good incentives, maybe tax breaks or something. What do you think can be done?
Okay, so Leanne, I think that it's very difficult, certainly in my sector, to divorce the private from the public sector. Right?
Yeah.
Let me just make that
As you said in the beginning.
as an opening
Yeah.
comment. And I also want to preface what I'm going to say by making one additional comment, which is not everything that is produced locally is more expensive, right?
Yes.
There's a perception that's widely held out there that if you've produced it locally, it's probably of a suboptimal quality, it's probably more expensive. Okay, that's not always the case, and there are significant pockets of excellence in our country that that exist in our country. Okay, now why did I say you cannot segregate the private from the public sector? Because the public sector is sitting with a lot of the volume. And very often, and I don't want to contradict what I said earlier, but very often you have to use the volumes that reside in your country to get competitiveness. And when you build on that competitiveness, eventually you start exporting.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Now, if we're preventing that from happening at base level where you can legislate for it, okay, it doesn't augur well for the private sector. So put very differently, in life you can either impose a solution on someone, or you can persuade someone. And to persuade someone, you've got to persuade them on logic. Because as you correctly say, a business that is out there that has to give a shareholder return is not going to get all sentimental and say, well, you know what, we're going to make 5% margin more out of importing from China. So we're going to forfeit that because, you know, poor Stavros or Leanne's business. They're not going to do that.
No.
Right? Okay. So what is it that we need to do to get that persuasion? And you're quite right, that's where we need to look at incentives. Incentives and disincentives. Okay, now, if a sector is particularly strategic to the country, and I think Martin alluded to this earlier, whatever you do in life, you've got to be competitive, right? There's only a certain premium people will pay. And when you start reaching that premium threshold, they're not going to pay for it. So we need a positive incentive, and we've done this in other areas, both at a corporate level and also at a government level, whether it's tax incentives or the likes. And I know those are going to be some scrutiny around WTO compliance, but I think we've looked into this, and it can happen, right, where you offer tax incentives or allowances, customized and tailored tax incentives and allowances.
Yeah.
That could be at a CapEx level, for example. So that's the positive incentive that you're looking at. Now, a different type of incentive would be, and this is what I started saying earlier, is a particular sector or product is strategic to the country, because you know that if you get volume production for that product, it's going to amplify your exports and your volumes will increase 10 or 20-fold. And I'm afraid we're not achieving that through SEZs. I think we need to relook at our SEZs in the country. But a way of doing it is that if a product is strategic, you impose duties on it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what government can do in the realms of the private sector. Now, what can the private sector itself do? Okay. Yolandi's alluded to it. So we all follow BEE scorecards, and there's all an element for supplier development. Okay, and there's an element for enterprise development and even SED, as they call it these days. Are we really optimizing and maximizing that, the country? The answer is very simply we're not. Okay, so we need to look at companies, corporates themselves embracing this as an internal policy. So nothing prevents you from putting out your own policy in any corporate that doesn't require government to impose regulation and or legislation on you, to say it is the policy of company X that we will buy 50% from local companies, provided they're within a narrow band of 5% price range or 10%, whatever the number is. So nothing prevents you from doing that. So put very differently, Leanne, in the public sector, you can impose legislation, and we've got the legislation, but as I said earlier, we are not implementing it, and there's got to be accountability and transparency as to why this is not happening. And I think these cases should be referred to the Auditor General, and it should become audit findings. If departments or municipalities or whoever are not implementing an existing designation legislation or tender that's been designated, then they need to be held to account, because they're damaging the prospects, the economic prospects and employment of the country. So that's in the public sector, legislate or implement legislation. And in the private sector, I think you need the persuasion element, and then corporates themselves have to look at introducing this as a policy. So Martin and I spend our lifetime trying to get the corporate sector to vaccinate. You're trying to do it through gentle persuasion. And it's going to land up being each company will implement its own policy if it sees the wisdom around it. Okay, now, there is a very definite wisdom to procuring locally, because it's going to grow the economy and everyone will benefit from it. And it's a bit like I live on an island, I'm not going to worry about what goes on around me, right? But eventually the tsunami comes in and you don't have your own island. So you can't say, well, localization is not my problem. Okay, I'm worried about a margin that I'm chasing. We have to, as a corporate sector, change the mindset, and that's what they've done successfully, by the way, in Asia, other parts of the world.
Yeah, I mean, it is, it's not, it's starting with simple things. Where you buy your pens, make sure this is local. Your furniture, make sure it's local. Your desks, your rugs, there is so much that goes into ensuring that, as the private sector, even if it isn't, I know that it's not necessarily, possible on every single thing you do, but there is a way to do it. Martin, I'm going to get to questions because I'm inundated with questions, guys. There's some very, very great questions that are coming through here, so I can't wait to get into them. But what I want to do is Martin, just get a message from you on this as well. We see what the guests have, but everybody's been saying, and I've been loving what we've been saying, particularly when it comes to making, mandatory policy for the private sector, perhaps finding incentives for the public sector to make it much more attractive for them to go this route and to support local. If we take an international business practice, where do you believe we can learn from as South Africa? China's one country, and we know that. They tend to do it very, very well. I know you talk about something like America, where Trump came in and basically was like, buy American, hire American, and that was about it. I don't know if it sat well, but talk to me about an example of a country that is doing exceptionally well on the buy local front.
Well, it's for sure we're seeing within the UK that is happening. I think Trump is not a good example for the reasons that you cited. By the way, Biden has also driven a sort of a domestic agenda. We all have an obligation to ensure that we create a conducive environment for our private sector to flourish. And when we talk about private sector, I've seen one of the questions. We're talking about formal and informal. We're talking about large and small, domestic and multinational companies across the entire spectrum. Now, many of the examples that have been cited thus far are actually much smaller enterprises, and we actually know that if you look again in Europe or in the UK, it's SMMEs that drive the economy. It's not large companies that are the bedrock of real sustainable both employment creation and contribution to GDP. South Africa is a very poor cousin to much of the rest of the world in that case. We know that some of it is due to skills, much of it is due to difficult access to finance. A third aspect is due to the fact that we have restricted policies. Now, let us ensure that when we talk about localization and buying local, we don't impose additional restrictions that actually create a disincentive as opposed to the incentives that we've heard about from all of your panelists today to ensure that there can be a real drive for localization. Most of the time, by the way, it doesn't need to be imposed. It is because it makes good commercial and economic sense to be able to acquire goods or services where they are locally available. It's driven, obviously, by a level of patriotism, but we need to be careful that patriotism doesn't eclipse the need for a strong commercial financial justification, which is the point that I was trying to make earlier. And in that particular regard, it's not just a question of the private sector, large and small, as I said, coming to the party. It is a function of government ensuring that we have a suitably conducive, enabling environment. And the private sector has got a very significant role to play by engaging in government in that regard. And as I said previously, we've had an unprecedented level of cooperation and collaboration during the pandemic. And if we can't use that experience to be able to apply specifically in this case, where we can generate a much greater contribution from domestic manufacturing than we've been able to date. As Stav said, it's been on the agenda since 1994. We haven't had the traction we need to. We know what all the ingredients are, Leanne. We just need to make sure that we now start putting them in place. And institutions like Proudly South Africa have got an absolutely central role to play by assuring consumers that both the quality and the price is competitive and acceptable.
Yeah. And give SMMEs a break. That's my word. You know, give small businesses a chance. Yeah, it's like you're setting up for failure. I mean, you try and do business. We talk about doing local. I mean, Darren and I from Proudly SA were having a conversation before this, and she was telling me about a story of an envelope manufacturer who, you know, a big corporate wanted to buy from them, but they couldn't deliver all of the envelopes for the year in the month of January. Like, you're going to use 1 million envelopes in January, you know, and then they lost the contract and rather went off, you know, and bought it from China because they could deliver on time. Have a heart. You know, SMMEs are really trying out there. And these are the kind of stories that you'll hear and we will hear. And this is why you're almost setting the SMEs for failure. And this is a big thing. Listen, I'm a victim of a failed SME, and I know what it's like to try and deliver to big corporates. They won't even listen. You must carry the costs, you must do everything, and they'll pay in their 60 days terms and conditions. And they know that, you know, these are companies that can't afford that. So, you know, let's have a heart. Let's get into some of the questions that have come through, and there've really been some lovely ones. So let me start reading them. Here's the first one that came in, and well, I don't know, put your hands up, whoever feels that this is these questions are good for you to answer. So first up, I'm the founder of the Prototype Employment Empowerment Tech South Africa. The tech connects SME designers and clothing brand owners to the appropriate cut, measure and trim specialists for our country to produce sustainable fast fashion on demand. There are 3 goals for this tech. 1, increase employment. 2, impacting buy local South Africa. And 3, upskill the people in 5 IR. I seek runway capital funding, and I'm ready to do the hard work to make South Africa great. So I think that is perhaps maybe just a comment or probably from the person. I'm not sure there's a question there, but listen, we wish you the best of luck. So that's Prototype Employment Empowerment Tech South Africa. That's one of the SMEs we're talking about. Here's a question though. This is coming from Sanel Guinness saying, what is the strategy of Proudly South African to leverage technology to increase the volume of local procurement and the interface with DTIC to expand expand the export markets of our local products? Eustace, do you want to grow that one?
Yeah. As much as we have a domestic mandate, we are alive to the fact that we operate within a global environment. And our board might not like this too much because they want us to focus and stay within our lane. But one of the things that we have gotten involved in now, utilizing technology to take South African products to export markets, is we've leveraged of the Dubai 2020 Expo. And together with the DTIC, we're able to work on a program that led us to a point where we have a virtual expo platform. There are many companies in South Africa who have products that will find expression in foreign markets, and but we're not going to be able to go to the expo itself. And so through that virtual expo, when you go into the South Africa page, the Team South Africa page, linked to our participation at the Dubai 2020 Expo, you can walk virtually through an expo and find high quality locally made products. The capability that Proudly South African then brought over and above creating that virtual expo is you are able to then, from that stand, choose a product that you want to buy, and you go to the the online store that we have RSA made and make a purchase, and we deliver anywhere in the world. So we are utilizing technology to take South African products to international markets. I think our role as Proudly South African is to find the products, and we work with sister organizations like Brand South Africa and Invest South Africa and the DTIC and DERCO and them. We're able to take the messages out to say that the message that says you can find products, high quality locally made products that you require as an economy wherever you're sitting in the world, and we're able to deliver it to you. And that's the capability that Proudly South African has brought to the table up to this point. And the technology that was developed such that it will be used beyond Dubai 2020. It can be used by any entity, whether it's a private sector entity or a public sector entity, and that was the agreement with National Treasury and the DTIC when the investment was made, that we should invest in technology that will be utilized beyond Dubai 2020 by anyone in the country, as long as you are able to support that virtual expo platform with an online store that has capability for people to transact, buy, and get the products delivered anywhere in the world.
Okay, good. So. There we go. So that's one of the responses from Proudly SA on that one, which is great. Here's one, and I don't know how we address this, because it seems to be an ongoing problem. So here's a comment followed by a statement, and then I don't know if we can maybe help. I am a transformation director for the South African Maritime Business Forum, the chairperson for Freight Logistics South Africa. We are busy now with the development of the National Oceans Economy Master Plan. Please invite the maritime industry. It is dominated by multinationals which are not BEE compliant. Access to market is difficult as they prefer white-owned companies and multinationals. Herein lies a big problem. I don't know, Eustace, if you want to go there.
Look, the oceans economy can't be ignored, and I think it's very important. That's why the master plan processes is one that we are actively involved in as Policy South Africa. The role of Policy South Africa with regards to each master plan is to drive up demand for that which the master plan advocates for. So if it's a sugar master plan, we're involved in the conversations that will look at the industrial users of sugar, the consumers themselves, anyone who can help contribute to the growth of consumption and demand for that which is represented by the master plan. So we're actively participating in all the master plans that are out there, and even in this one, once it gets to a point where it has been adopted and it's ready to be implemented, we will definitely be a part of that master plan, but obviously linked to the mandate of Policy South Africa, which is promotional in nature.
Yeah, because I mean, I think this is a follow-on. Khomotso Mogale, South Africa needs to own its own territorial waters so we can localize our oceans economy. What is your plan in ensuring that all South Africans benefit from this oceans economy?
Yeah.
Tough one for you.
I think it's the master plan.
Yeah,
and that's why I like the idea of the master plan being generated. A few years ago, we participated in a process that looked at how to leverage of the strategy that was being developed for the oceans economy. And it was a few departments that had come together to develop this. It's a pity that it has sort of fizzled off, but we are glad that there's a master plan that is coming up. Because each and every one of those master plans has different work streams that looks at different facets. And even that will be taken care of through a specific work stream that will look at it and will have stakeholders that are able to help turn the tide. Because for us, the master plan should not just be another accord that is signed and sits there and there's another policy that is not implemented. The master plans are crafted such that there can be real deliverables that all of us can tangibly see.
Yeah.
Leanne, can I just add to that?
Would you, please?
I think a comment that Martin made that is exceptionally important is we're not going to get to the economic growth trajectory that we seek in our country unless we get a significant stimulation of SMEs, right? And that's what Martin was saying is your backbone of most economies around the world is SMEs. And Martin also mentioned what was working against our SMEs, so things like skills and access to finance, etc. Those are all things that work against our SMEs. Now, we have a budget in the public sector of 1 trillion rand. We've got to ask ourselves as a country, are we best leveraging that 1 trillion rand to A, optimize value, and B, to stimulate SME and SME growth and transformation? Well, the answer is pretty obvious, right? So I'm not going to get into, because I don't know enough about it, about territorial waters and who owns the waters. I'm discussing a principle here which has come through in both of your questions. And the principle is one of probably small businesses being excluded. And how do you bring them into the mainstream of the economic activity? And we need to look at within the realms of what's affordable, and we've got zero wriggle room, fiscal wriggle room. Martin made the point earlier as well. We don't have wriggle room. We've got to think creatively about what it is that we do to stimulate SMEs. And one of the levers that we have is this 1 trillion rand. And sure, a lot of it goes into salaries and wages and benefits. I understand that. But then, maybe there's 600 billion that's left. Are we optimally using that as a country, as a lever for transformation and SME growth? The answer is a resounding no. And that's what we've got to look at these things. What have we got at our disposal? Think creatively around it. and then let's look at a plan around stimulating SMEs. I can tell you, you grow SMEs, as Martin has said, in this country, you look at a completely different picture in 5 years' time.
Yeah.
And I haven't addressed the skills and the finance issue because I also feel that our DFIs in this country are operating like commercial banks. But that's a different discussion, different day. But I'm just making a point around being smart with what we've got at our disposal right now.
Indeed. Martin, do you want to come in on that? Because, I mean, you brought this up. This is a good point. Let's sit on that, because I think most of the people that are watching us online and posing these questions are owners or startups or have their own SMEs. So let's address this.
Yeah, well, I think the point's been made, Leanne, very clearly. We have identified the challenges. The structures that are being put in place right now, in my view, are capable of ensuring that we can connect people to the right opportunities, whether it's a platform such as Proudly South Africa, whether it's the Localization Support Fund, whether it's the Business Unity South Africa Localization Committee, or whether it's the DFIs that Stavros has referred to. He didn't mention them by name, but the likes of the Industrial Development Corporation, the National Empowerment Fund. It's not as though we don't have the institutional capacity. Where we failed in the past, in my view, has been to ensure that there's not only an alignment of the key issues, but that we actually act as an integrator, that we're able to ensure that we can put these networks to effect properly, quickly, and impactfully. That, I think, is coming into focus. That has been the primary area of attention over the past 6 to 9 months. The work that we've been doing is how can we liberate SMMEs in the way that we need to. The 3 areas that I mentioned are the 3 critical ones. There are others, but every single one of them can be addressed now. It goes without saying, and Leanne, I need to emphasize this nevertheless, that at the end of the day, each and every one of these propositions needs to be economically viable. They need to have competent and capable management. They need to have a business plan that withstands scrutiny. And we need to create the market, to the extent it doesn't already exist, both domestically and internationally, particularly, as I've indicated before, on the continent, specifically to take advantage of the AFCTFA, which is a very significant development that's taken place over the past 18 months to access markets in Africa. Aspen is a fantastic example of what can be achieved. Unfortunately, it doesn't qualify anymore as an SMME. Stav will say at some stage or other it was an SMME, but no more. But you know, from small acorns, large oak trees do grow. And as I indicated, SMMEs need to be the bedrock across all aspects of the economy for not only economic revival, but sustainable jobs as well.
Love it. Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, I don't know, fortunately or fortunately, no longer in that little segment there. Stavros. Yolanda, what about your company? I mean, let's go back there to, as we say, you know, you do start as a little acorn, and there is room to grow. And I want to give hope to a lot of the people that are listening and watching, and, you know, saying that I know you do face those difficulties, but there is hope out there. I mean, you can get that. And then I want to talk about the Africa Free Trade Agreement, because, Martin, that was my next point that I was going to lead on to, and it's a question as well. But while we're there, talk to us about that. You know,
is there hope? Yeah. No, there definitely is hope out there. In fact, I was thinking while Martin was speaking that possibly this marketplace is exactly what MAP is, right? Your market access platform. And Acacia Medical, you know, as the smaller ACON, as a member of Proudly South African, now gets an opportunity to be represented on a platform of this nature, where issues that are faced by the smaller enterprises really are, do we have access? Do our customers or end users actually have visibility of our existence? We don't really have huge budgets to leverage on technology and have all of these awesome e-commerce platforms. But here's an RSA-made store, for instance, that one can make use of without all of those huge capital in investments and injections that are coming out of your own pocket. But your products can be on there. Your end user has access and visibility of who you are and all of your products. And this is all sitting on a platform that has already been vetted that says you as a business are selling high quality products because you've been vetted by Proudly South African, and you are a local manufacturer, and therefore, here's an end user, you need to support this company. So there definitely is hope out there. I think it's a matter of being aware of all of the organizations that you can almost piggyback on, so that they can be the noisemakers for you, so they can be knocking on the doors that you can't knock on, so that they can then go and be your ambassadors or your spokespersons at the tables that you can't sit at. And I think I said this earlier, we definitely, on a smaller scale, cannot do it alone. But we need to do it in partnership with such associations. So there definitely is light at the end of the tunnel. And I think we have seen the business, our business, definitely shifting and progressing to the better. We never had all of the attention and the awareness just wasn't there up until the time where we were behind this Proudly South African vehicle, where all of a sudden an article was published about the company, right? In the Business Insider, and we had Proudly SA posting about us on the social media platforms, and they are tweeting here and there, building the awareness. Again, this is marketing that a small company can leverage on because you don't have these big marketing budgets. So it's about knowing how to leverage on those who can make the noise for you. So
100%.
Proudly SA, your noisemakers.
Yeah, which is a good thing. I know Eustace at the beginning was actually talking about, you know, the logo of Proudly SA, and it's that tick. You know, the tick that's there with the colours of South Africa behind it. Well, I mean, you know, people they will do anything for an Instagram tick or a Twitter tick or a whatever. Get a Proudly South Africa tick. It holds as much of that verified status as before, because you automatically look at it and think, okay, no, this is Proudly South African, it's good quality. That's my mindset, and I'm hoping it's a lot of other people as well. All right, on to the Africa Free Trade Agreement, because I know I was there yesterday. In fact, I was coming from there at the very beginning, the first day of it, and it's going on for the rest of this week. And it's a massive event that, not the Africa Free Trade Agreement, it's the Intra-Africa, Intra-Africa Trade Fair that's taking place, which of course is piggybacking big time on the Free Trade Agreement, which I think is so important to the continent. And I was really astounded to hear some of the ridiculously low figures of trade on the continent. And I mean, Stavros, you can talk to us about this because you do operate in numerous African countries. But I mean, only 16% of trade on the continent is done through intra-Africa. You know, whereas you look at other continents, their level of business is massive with each other. And, you know, when we look at the impediments, whether it be rail or road or just general transport or corruption or whatever it may be that you deal with within these African countries, which is really a big problem. So we need to focus on this and how this policy is going to help us and businesses here in South Africa in particular. And here's a question I'll throw in, because this is kind of where we're going right now. This is from Akona saying, can you speak to how the buy local agenda fits into the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is more focused on boosting inter-Africa trade and creating a single market for Africa? So a long-winded question, so Stavros, grab it.
Great, thanks, Leanne. And I think it's an immensely important question.
Yeah.
Because let me again preface what I'm going to say by two facts, right? The first is we suffer a serious dose of Afropessimism on the continent. Okay, let me put that out there. What do I mean by that? I mean that very often as African consumers, we doubt African-produced products. So we'll talk and get a fuzzy and warm feeling around localization and buying in, intra-Africa trade. But when it comes to the crunch, and I'll give you an example, in my in my previous position, I ran the export business for Aspen. And I traveled the continent extensively. And I remember an incident in Dakar. I won't tell you which company. I went and I saw this would-be Senegalese partner, and he said, "You're right, my brother, we have to buy from each other, and we must only buy from the continent, right?" So I spent 2 days there, and I found him at the airport again, the same guy. And I said, "Where are you off to?" And he said, "I'm off to Paris. So, by the way, my kids are studying there. I own an apartment there. And I'm going to go and buy medicines to import back in," right? So, and I'm not singling out an individual, but this is pervasive throughout the continent.
Yeah.
So
Side note, was he the referee at the Bafana match? Yeah, I don't know. Anyone else
actually
pick that up? I did. 'Cause
transformed you,
he
right?
was a Senegalese.
Probably,
yeah.
he probably was.
Okay. Sorry, carry on.
And I don't. I think the VAR was imported. It didn't work. Okay, so let's not doubt ourselves as a continent, because there are areas where we can produce with excellence. Okay, so that's the first thing we must address. The second thing is, Africa has failed dismally in aggregating its volumes. So we talk a lot, and Martin will tell you this because we've had this debate so many times. We talk a lot about whether it's in BRICS that we represent the continent or elsewhere, that we're a market of 1.3 billion people, right? And it's great, we talk about this all the time, but we never aggregate the volumes. To say to China or whoever it is, listen, this is the size vaccines. We need 1.3 billion vaccines. Okay, we're going to aggregate and we're going to leverage that volume to produce locally, and we'll get the economies of scale. So those are two things for me in response, Leanne, that we've got to address with the greatest vigor. Let's shed the Afropessimism, and where excellence exists, let's embrace it. And secondly, we need to aggregate our volumes so that we can get economies of scale on the continent, and that we can leverage those volumes to create not only investment opportunities but industrialization opportunities as well.
Great, very good. From the Africa Free Trade Agreement, do you want to add anything from Proudly SA?
I think for us, and I think this is the challenge that was thrown at us by the Network Social Partners through their Trade and Industry Chamber, was we need to find a way to take South African products into the African market and leverage of the free trade area and the free trade agreement. And so the question asked by Sunil Janes earlier on is very important, in that technology is going to help make it easy. We know there's all of these bottlenecks that are involved when it comes to trading on the continent. I mean, a lot of the entrepreneurs that affiliate with us have spoken to us about those challenges. In fact, there are strong views also coming from the organization, within the organization itself, that it's going to be a difficult space that we don't necessarily have capacity to handle. But the best we can do is to find the products and put them on platforms where buyers sitting across the continent can find them. And that's why we like the idea of having the Inter-Africa Trade Fair. We have companies that are exhibiting there during this week, and we've partnered with the DTIC. So that's the approach from Proudly South African. We're going to utilize technology and partnerships because as much as we are constrained by our mandate, but those two opportunities exist for us to utilize partnerships and technology to take South African products. I mean, whatever is produced by the two companies that are represented here today needs to find its way into those markets. And we think partnerships and technology will help us do that for those companies.
Wonderful.
Sure.
All right, so a quick one from Pierre. I can see our time is running into time trouble. Ugh, this always happens. I thought we had a long time, but no, the time has just been stolen. From Pierre, saying that the automotive industry contributes Pierre Wenzel, thanks Pierre, contributes 6.9% to GDP. The automotive industry is the largest manufacturing sector in the country's economy. The industry accounts for 30.1% of the country's manufacturing output. So, how do we leverage the above low-hanging fruit, which has increased by 3 to 5% annually, to assist with localization and creating employment? Martin, I don't know if I'm throwing you in the deep end on this one. Do you want to try and tackle that one?
Well, it's an absolutely key point that's been made. Of course, in the case of the automotive industry, Leanne, they have been aggressively supported, not just by domestic and international companies, but by the DTIC. There's a master plan In fact, Eustace talked about the different sector master plans, and I think it is an excellent template. There's more that the automobile industry actually can do. But if we use that as an example of how you can get component manufacturers, service providers, and indeed these international partners to be able to work together in an environment where we can create the right opportunity to be competitive, and not just domestically. After all, our automobile industry is now competitive continentally and internationally. That is what must apply elsewhere. We have, I think Eustace will correct me, 6 or 7 such industry master plans. They speak very clearly to the concept of localization, utilizing not just large but small and medium-sized suppliers. We need to roll that out. The only other point I wanted to make, Leanne, is that part of the problem we have is we don't have adequate visibility and transparency. We have a habit in South Africa of reinventing the wheel, literally and indeed metaphorically. We need to pool the resources that we've got. We need to ensure that we've got full, as I said, visibility as to what work has already taken place. We need to harness the resources, whether it be in the public or the private sector, and make sure that they can work together in a collaborative manner. And we need to make sure that we channel information in an effective way to those who need it. If we were able to solve those problems quickly, I can tell you that we'd be having a very different discussion in a year's time, and the people who are on your panel have got extremely, I think, relevant expertise, particularly but not only proudly South Africa in that regard.
Yeah, indeed. Martin, thank you. I'm going to steal a minute because I have got 2 comment-stroke questions here as well. So we'll quickly go through them. Jabulani is saying, when will government start purchasing from small businesses? And this is a big thing. So it's that, that table that you sit at. Please ask them why they don't do this. And this is from Jabulani saying, as a cleaning product manufacturer, we constantly are being sidelined. We operate in a space where we are surrounded by these departments, but none of them support us.
We're coming up with a solution for that,
Good.
utilizing technology. We've come up with a model of integrating the Proudly SA database with the Central Supply Database, National Treasury CSD, because you can't do business with government if you're not registered on the CSD.
Yeah.
And so any buyer in the country that works for any organ of state will be able to go into the CSD and do a search, and all those companies that will have the logo next to them, you can already know you are buying a locally made product. Because what you find on the CSD, a lot of entrepreneurs who are middlemen who win these contracts and buy the products from elsewhere, just so that they can maximize on the margin that they make. And so what we are making available to government through this integration with National Treasury's database is an opportunity for government to know that they're not just buying from an entrepreneur who might import, but that you are buying from a manufacturer and someone who supply locally made products. And I think the other short answer that maybe I should have given is government must just play by its own rules. We mentioned it at the beginning.
Absolutely.
The rules are there. Government has come up with the framework and the policy, and it's contained in the legislation. They must just follow their own.
Follow the policy.
Yeah,
And
sure.
yeah, that's the problem. I'm hoping that we get this. This is the private sector panel, but I'm hoping that we get the public. Did I say private or public? This is the private sector.
Private sector.
We're wanting that public sector one. So we can have a serious conversation as to why they are not following through on the policy. And then finally, our industry is dominated by multinationals with massive resources. Competing with these companies in price becomes a challenge. How can the DTI or any government institution assist SMEs with regard to price wars? We've seen instances where prices are lowered so that SMMEs appear to be expensive when responding to transversal tenders or centralized tenders.
I think Stavros can give an example of what happens when, maybe Stavros should talk to you about, examples that we have where prices are lowered to win the bids, but when the bid is now, the bid process has been finalized and people are appointed, what happens afterwards? Prices escalate, and government does pay that premium.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you can tell us that.
Very simply put, we need to make better strategic use of the capacities that exist in the country. And I'm going to speak to, I know this is private sector, very quickly public sector, right?
Yeah.
If we know that we are consuming 5 million packs of ARVs every month, and we've got a capacity of 3 million, your starting point would be to say, well, we've got to utilize the full 3 million. Okay, and then what do we do with the remaining 2 million to stimulate SMEs to come into that space? And SMEs can't enter that space because usually these foreign companies or importers undercut the pricing, but as Eustace said, can't deliver. So what you need to do there is, and secondly, SMEs can't come into the market because financiers won't give them funding because there are no off-takes. They don't have off-takes. So we need to give these companies a break, give them the off-takes, longer-term agreements, and then they'll be able to compete. Right now, they don't have an off-take to compete in the first place. So all I'm saying is, and that's just one example, there are many others, and there are many other ways of skinning this particular cat that you're raising, right? But what I'm saying is we're not thinking things through creatively.